Hi guys, welcome to Module 8. This is all about communication, and discussing communications is one of my most favorite lectures and discussions, especially in person. Obviously, communication is so essential and we do it every single day. At its most basic level, you think about it as an exchange between two or more individuals, and you're going through a process of encoding and decoding messages. You're also creating a shared meaning between the two of you, or maybe between the group, among the group. So it's a very important process because we know that the lack of communication has started wars and has started numerous conflicts all over the globe and among different people and different groups, and so the actual being able to create positive communication is so essential. And I want you to also think about this as we're going through the PowerPoint slides. I want you to think about communications in your own life and where you can improve upon your communications. So you can take the time and watch this short video. It'll give you a nice little glimpse into a corporate meeting. There are several videos in here that I think are excellent. It's a great play of humor on some timeless lack of communication skills. You can see in terms of communication in projects, communication really drives project success. It is one of the top 5 reasons why there are struggling projects. So usually you can always pinpoint that there is a lack of communication in a certain area, and that is probably where the project is struggling. It really leads to the most positive outcomes if there is strong communication. It instills confidence in your stakeholders. It's also one of the main roles of a project manager. This is absolutely one of my largest things that I did. One of my largest roles at Smith & Nephew when I was a program manager for the fitness center and working in corporate wellness. We spent so much time communicating with members face to face, through email, through presentations, through group discussions in front of group fitness members. I was communicating all the time with CEOs, with manufacturing employees. Making sure that I could tailor my messages to the appropriate department was super important and super essential. And having that love for people and caring about others and how that they receive a message is also very essential, especially when you are working with so many different people. All right, so you can see through here of some of the things I've just mentioned: status reports, kickoff meetings, executive reports, presentations, financial reports. All of these things play into communications, and they are very essential in driving the goals and objectives forward for a project. You have done many of them throughout your time in college, but when you get out into the real world, and again, we've talked so much about how projects can really be anything. This class in and of itself is one of the classes that you can apply to any field you land in, regardless of if you decide you don't want to go into a healthcare field or health and wellness, or if you change course and you go a different route, these skills will still be beneficial to you in the future. But every project manager knows that organization and communication are absolutely essential in his or her daily life. You can, of course, see all of these things that we've discussed before, the communications you've had in your own group. One of the best reasons to effectively communicate is it manages expectations. It also manages the project team, right? It reduces conflicts. If you are able to communicate your expectations, then there is less room for being disappointed if you are in constant communication with your team and you are providing those expectations. Every single semester, I outline my expectations as an instructor for my classes so that they know that this is what I accept and this is what I do not accept, right? So you know all of those things from the very beginning, so there are no surprises, so we can minimize the surprises, so we can minimize the disappointment with unmet expectations. All of this is incredibly essential when dealing with people. So I want you to make sure that you are thinking through your daily life right now. You are thinking through your relationships. Where can you improve in communications? Can you be more on top of communications and maybe communicate better, maybe express what you're saying in a clearer message. All of this is incredibly important when you're managing stakeholder relationships. We've talked about ethical behavior previously. We've talked about ethical behavior and how it is good for business. It is good for business to not lie, cheat, or steal from your stakeholders. I know that may seem very obvious, but creating an honest and ethical persona, right? Creating that reputation is so important because word gets out. Word gets out about your reputation, who you are as a person. This is something I often share with my classes about stakeholders and how you can have a stakeholder map, because there are so many different people that a project manager comes into contact with. You can have internal stakeholders within the building that you are in, within your actual program, and you can have external stakeholders. I had a variety of internal and external stakeholders at Smith & Nephew. I also had stakeholders at Health Source Solutions, because remember, I worked the contract with Health Source Solutions was to manage and promote health and wellness within the fitness center for the employees at Smith & Nephew. So at the Smith & Nephew level, I was working with fitness center members. I was working with Smith & Nephew employees who were not fitness center members. We had outreach programs. We had blood drives. We had the mammogram bus that we would coordinate for the variety of Smith & Nephew employees. I worked with the occupational nurse. I worked with a variety of manufacturing employees. I worked with executives. I worked with financial employees. And outside of Smith & Nephew, I was really an ambassador for Smith & Nephew to really provide a presence in the community. And as Memphis has really, we have really driven forward the wellness initiative at Smith & Nephew, working to build relationships with St. Jude, working to build relationships with Komen, the Komen Foundation Breast Cancer Awareness, as well as the YMCA, and participating in a variety of community activities every single year. So the stakeholder map and being familiar with who your stakeholders are, so that again you can provide a positive light for your organization, is incredibly important. If you are not a good communicator, this is something that word will get out. If you are a positive light, if you represent your company well, that will also get out. So you want to think about the contrast there. What do I want to present as I'm going forward into the working world? What front do I want to present in terms of what do I stand for? Do I stand for ethical behavior? Am I going to do anything, lie, cheat, and steal to get to the position that I want? No, because that is part of your reputation. And I hope that you are really thinking about your character as you're presenting yourself to possible future employers, making sure that you are protecting your reputation. It's incredibly essential. All right, obviously you can see different types of stakeholder relationships. I'm not going to harp on this too long, but really you have you do have a positive role in being able to sway particular stakeholders over to see the company in a different light depending on how you interact with them. Of course, you can always maintain positive stakeholder relationships. These are probably existing relationships, maybe that they have bought in really to the internal goals and objectives, the mission of the actual program, that they are there to contribute, and they are your biggest fan. Those people are probably easier to maintain because they've been there for a while. They've continuously supported what you are representing. So shifting from those stakeholder relationships to really what it looks like to communicate. We mentioned previously that senders and receivers, there is an encoding and a decoding of the actual messages that are going back and forth between someone. However, there are also contextual and interpersonal barriers in between this process, and that is where so much of the problems really come into play. And we're going to look at some of those contextual barriers. You can see, of course, a competition for time and attention. This is, of course, one of our largest hindrances in terms of being able to determine communication, what someone is actually intending, especially if they are not paying attention to their message that they're delivering, or they're only giving half the picture as opposed to the whole picture. The organizational design complexity, how a program is laid out, the actual diversity within the population. That can also cause some problems within the organization, and making sure that someone is understanding the other person correctly, that they are encoding and decoding the messages that are sent correctly. Also, attitudes about communication. That can be a big barrier in terms of, does your manager care about communicating with his or her population? I had a manager a long time ago when I was right out of college, and I had no idea this manager liked me. She never told me that I was a good employee. She never, I found out months later that she actually liked me and she promoted me. I really kind of lived in fear of her. And I hope that she did not communicate well. Okay, let me emphasize that. She did not communicate well. So I want you to think about this in terms of communication and your takeaway points from this, because you have the ability to communicate well with your participants. You have to plan out your communications. That's one of the reasons why we are planning out your communications for your actual projects. So you are planning when you will send and when you will send messages to your employees, and what types of messages that will be, or to your stakeholders. All of this is very essential in driving the success of the project forward. Effective communication also really targets the specific audience. So if your audience, if who you are communicating to does not have access to email, email is not the route to go. However, when you are communicating, as a general rule of thumb, it is best to provide multiple channels of communication. That will absolutely be an exam question, to provide multiple channels of communication to convey a message. That is why I verbally discuss your lecture materials with you. That's why I provide a PowerPoint. That's why I send you updates and reminders, communicating with you in a variety of ways so that everyone is on the same page. You also, I'm going to highlight a few other things in terms of interpersonal barriers to communication. This is something you're probably familiar with, but people have different frames of reference. They have a different background. They have different values or different beliefs. They have some people might have judgmental attitudes. Others might lack empathy with your particular situation. These are all things that are going to get in the way of communications. So I want you to think through your own, when someone is communicating with you, are there interpersonal barriers that you are bringing to the table? Do you have a lack of empathy for them? Do you have judgmental attitudes towards them? All of these things are very important to expose within yourself so that you, of course, can be the best communicator possible. You can see all of these things. I'm going to let y'all read through these in terms of types of communications and the upward and downward flow of communication. You can see different models interacting with communication networks. But I will point out boundary spanning. Boundary spanning is all about how health programs communicate with external stakeholders. As I've mentioned before, that relationship with stakeholders is very essential whenever you are moving the goals and objectives forward. It is critical to communicate with your external stakeholders very well and very clearly, especially when you're marketing a program, when you're trying to receive funding for a program, when you're driving a public policy forward and advocating for a particular city council member who is for that policy. Keep in mind that politics and people go together. They're very important, especially when you are representing another company. Plan your communications. This is something that we have really emphasized in this class. Use your manners. This is why we make students use a communications policy within our classrooms. That's why we make you practice that communications policy. Stay clear, concise, courteous, consistent, and compelling. You want to be memorable without being exhaustive, especially in your written communications. And I can't emphasize this enough. Anytime you are communicating, you are building a relationship. Building relationships are essential for driving your mission forward with your company, with your healthcare organization. Really, the way you're communicating, your nonverbal communications are also very essential when you are speaking to a variety of people. practice your communications, and they will all get better with time. Have a great day. Thanks.